She said it loud. On purpose. So the entire room could hear. You didn't come to say goodbye to your father. You came for the house. That's all you two ever cared about. I remember the exact sound my shoes made on the hardwood floor when I stopped walking. That old creak. The same one I'd heard 1,000 times as a kid sneaking to the kitchen at night. The floor of my father's house. The house I grew up in. And my Aunt Rita was standing in the middle of it, looking at me and my sister like we were strangers who'd shown up uninvited. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. 40 people in the room. The smell of casseroles and candles and cheap sympathy flowers. My father's body 10 feet away in an open casket. And she chose that moment. That specific, deliberate moment. Nobody said a word. That silence told me everything I needed to know about what the next year of my life was going to look like. My name is Daniel Sawyer. I'm 27. I work in IT remotely from my apartment in Pittsburgh, and I've spent most of my adult life being the quiet one in the room. People underestimate that. Rita certainly did. My sister Nora is 31. She's an accountant at a mid-sized firm in Chicago, the kind of person who can look at a column of numbers and physically feel when something is wrong, like a musician hearing a note that's half a step off. She's calm in the way that only someone who's learned to swallow anger over many years becomes calm. She loved our father deeply, called every Sunday, drove the 4 hours to rural Ohio at least once a month, even when work was brutal. She is not the villain of this story. She was just treated like one. Our father, Michael Sawyer, died on a Tuesday in late October. Lung cancer, diagnosed 16 months prior. He was 61 years old, retired electrician, lifelong Ohio resident, the kind of man who fixed his neighbors' porches without being asked and never once talked about money unless he had to. He owned one thing of real value, a 4-bedroom house on 2 acres at the edge of a small town called Millhaven. Nothing extravagant. But to a family without generational wealth, it was everything. Rita moved in 3 years before he died. She was his younger sister, 54, recently divorced, renting a small apartment in Columbus that she said she could leave without much trouble. When Dad got his diagnosis, she called within the week, offered to move in, help with groceries, doctor appointments, the daily things that become impossible when you're sick and your kids live 4 hours away in opposite directions. We said yes. Of course we said yes. Nora and I kept sending money every month. For $100, whatever Dad said he needed. Rita managed the house. We visited when we could. Dad seemed stable, even grateful for the arrangement. He talked about Rita like she was keeping him afloat. We trusted her completely. That was our first mistake. The funeral was on a Thursday. I drove 6 hours straight from Pittsburgh, got there an hour after Nora, who had barely slept. We moved through the whole morning on autopilot. That particular fog that grief puts you on, where you shake hands and accept hugs and say thank you for coming without any of it fully landing. The house was packed. Extended family, neighbors, people I hadn't seen since high school. The smell of food and candles and something else underneath, something slightly off that I couldn't name at the time. Like furniture had been rearranged and nobody told you what moved. Rita met us at the door in black, composed, already playing hostess. She hugged Nora, shook my hand, said, "I'm so glad you both made it," in a tone that didn't sound like relief. It sounded like the opening move of something I wasn't ready for. 2 hours in, Nora found the boxes. 3 cardboard boxes stacked against the wall of Dad's bedroom. Packed, taped, labeled in black marker. One said Nora. One said Daniel. The third said Misk. I stood in that doorway without speaking for a long moment, just staring at my name written on a cardboard box in my father's bedroom like I was a tenant being cleared out. Then Rita appeared behind us. "I've been meaning to sort through things," she said, in the easy tone of someone discussing kitchen reorganization. "There's not much space, and I'll need the room." Nora turned around slowly. "I know that slowness. It means she's working very hard to stay level." "You'll need the room," Nora repeated. "The house is mine now." Rita said it the way you state something already settled. "Your father wanted me to have it. I gave up 3 years of my life for him while you two were off living your lives in the city. I was here. Every single day. I think that counts for something." "There's a will," I said. She smiled. Not warmly. "There are 2. The room went very quiet. I looked at Nora. Nora looked at me. Then Rita walked back down the hallway and said it again, louder, to everyone still holding their paper plates and plastic cups of sweet tea. She said we had come for the property. She said we hadn't been there when it mattered. She said our father had made his wishes clear to the people who actually showed up. 40 people heard it. Some of them nodded. My father was 10 feet away, and I had never felt so far from home in my entire life. But here's what Rita didn't know. 14 months earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with her. At least, not yet. I had installed security cameras in every room of that house. Every single room. It started with a phone call. Dad, about a year into his diagnosis, voice thinner than I remembered. He said tools kept disappearing from his shed. A drill, a set of wrenches he'd had since before I was born. He laughed it off, probably just losing my mind. Danny, but something underneath the laugh didn't sit right with me. I drove out 2 weekends later anyway. He was thinner than the last visit. Not dramatically, just enough that you notice when you hug someone. We sat in the kitchen, drank coffee, and he told me about the tools again. Then he mentioned the cellar door. Kept finding it unlocked in the mornings, even though he always locked it before bed. A jar of cash he kept in the pantry, old habit, that seemed lighter than it used to be. I asked him directly if he thought someone was taking his things. He looked at his cup for a long moment. I think I'm just getting old, Danny. He didn't look at me when he said it. That was the moment I decided to install the cameras. I told him there had been break-ins in the next county, which was true, and that I wanted to make sure his property was secure. He agreed immediately, almost with relief, like he'd been waiting for someone to suggest it without having to ask himself. 6 cameras, 2 outside, for inside. Cloud storage, motion-activated, accessible from my phone. I set everything up on a Saturday, drove back to Pittsburgh, and told myself I was probably being paranoid. For the first few months, I barely checked the footage. Nothing alarming. Rita cooking, Rita watching TV, Dad moving slowly through the hallway. The ordinary, slightly depressing footage of a sick man's daily life. Then Nora called. Something is wrong with his bank account, she said. No hello, no preamble. He asked me to help with some paperwork, and I had a login. Daniel, in the last 8 months, over $14,000 has been withdrawn in cash. Small amounts. Never more than $350 at a time. I pulled up the camera footage that night and went back weeks. And then I found it. Rita, 2 a.m. Kitchen. Moving through the dark like she knew exactly where she was going. Straight to the pantry, second shelf, behind the canned goods. Dad's cash jar. She counted out several bills with the ease of someone who had done this many times before, tucked them into her robe pocket, put the jar back exactly as she'd found it. Then she went back to bed. Timestamp, 2:17 a.m. A Tuesday. I sat in front of my laptop screen for a very long time. I called Nora, shared the footage without a word of explanation. We watched it together in silence. Then Nora said quietly, "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know yet. I'm going through everything." She didn't push. That's the thing about us. We argue about plenty, but not about strategy. When one of us says wait, the other one waits. For days later she called back. Early Sunday morning, voice flat. $43,200, she said. 26 months. Never more than $350 at a time. Always cash. Always spaced out enough to look like normal household expenses. That kind of precision isn't carelessness. That's a system. Rita hadn't been helping herself to grocery money. She had been running a deliberate, patient operation inside our dying father's house, while we sent money every month thinking it was going toward his medication. But the money was only part of it. 3 weeks later, going deeper into the footage, I found something worse. A man I didn't recognize walking through the front door on a Wednesday afternoon. Briefcase. Suit slightly too formal for a casual visit. Rita let him in. Already dressed up, hair done, like she'd been expecting him. I ran the name from the car parked outside through a basic search. Victor Pruitt, local estate attorney, 20 years in practice. He stayed for 38 minutes. When he left, Rita walked him to the door and said something close to his ear. He nodded once and left with papers in his briefcase that hadn't been there when he arrived. I checked the date. 9 weeks before Dad died. 3 weeks after his doctor had doubled his pain medication. I called Nora and said 4 words. She got a will. Silence. Then, "How much do we have?" "Enough," I said. "But we need a lawyer. Not local." She found one by the end of the week. Her name was Sandra Cole. Early 50s, inheritance litigation attorney out of Columbus, recommended by a partner at Nora's firm. The kind of person who asks one question, listens for 10 minutes, and then tells you exactly how bad your situation is without softening a single edge. We sat across from her on a gray November afternoon and put everything on the table. The footage of Pruitt entering the house. The timestamp. The $43,200 in documented withdrawals. Dad's medical records showing his pain medication had been doubled 3 weeks before Pruitt's visit. Sandra looked through everything without expression. Then she leaned back and said, "Where's the original will?" "We don't know," Nora said. We assumed Rita destroyed it. Sandra shook her head slowly. People like this don't destroy documents. They hide them. They want leverage. She was right. I went back through the cellar camera footage that same night. 11 days after the funeral, 10 a.m. Rita carried a metal strongbox down the cellar stairs and pushed it behind the old water heater in the back corner. Spent about 40 seconds making sure it was out of sight. Then walked back upstairs and made herself a cup of coffee like she'd just taken out the recycling. I called Sandra. It's in the cellar, I said. Behind the water heater. A pause. You have footage of her putting it there? Clear as anything. Another pause, shorter this time. Don't touch it. Don't go near it. I'll file for a court-ordered property inspection by end of week. The inspection happened on a Tuesday morning. A county sheriff, Sandra, me and Nora, and a court-appointed assessor walked through that house room by room, while Rita stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching. She didn't know about the cameras. She didn't know we knew exactly where to look. The assessor pulled the strongbox from behind the water heater in under 4 minutes. Inside, the original will, signed by Michael Sawyer 5 years prior at a legitimate Columbus law office with 2 independent witnesses. Completely valid. Completely legal. Leaving the house to Nora and Daniel Sawyer. Equally. Rita's face when they opened that box. I've tried to find the right word for it. It wasn't shock exactly. It was the specific expression of someone watching a plan they'd spent 3 years building start to come apart at the seams. She recovered quickly. Smiled even. Said something about how this changed nothing because the second will superseded it and her attorney would be in touch. She still thought she had the upper hand. She didn't know we were just getting started. Sandra filed 3 motions before Christmas. The first challenged the validity of the second will on grounds of undue influence. Dad had been on heavy pain medication when Pruitt made his house visit, a fact supported by his medical records and the prescription logs from his pharmacy. The second was a formal complaint against Victor Pruitt with the Ohio State Bar, citing the house visit, the circumstances of the signing, and the timestamp evidence from the camera footage. The third was a civil claim against Rita for financial elder abuse, $43,200 in documented unauthorized withdrawals, every transaction cross-referenced against the camera footage showing her at the cash jar at 2 a.m. We're not just contesting the will, Sandra told us after she filed. We're building a picture. Judges don't rule on documents. They rule on patterns. And the pattern here is very clear. Rita called me 2 days after Christmas. I almost didn't pick up. Daniel. Her voice was different, quieter, the hostess tone completely gone. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Your father would have wanted us to handle this as a family. I let her talk for about 30 seconds. Then I said, Rita, my attorney has advised me not to discuss the case. Have a good evening. And I hung up. Nora called me 30 seconds later. She called me too. Same script, almost word for word. We were both quiet for a moment. Then Nora said, almost to herself, she's scared. She should be, I said. The first court date was set for late February. Rita showed up with a local attorney named Greg Harmon, mid-60s, semi-retired, the kind of lawyer who'd handled property disputes in Millhaven for 30 years and knew every judge in the county by their first name. That was the point. Rita wasn't paying for expertise. She was paying for relationships. Sandra noticed immediately. On the drive back to the parking lot after the preliminary hearing, she said, almost casually, he's going to push for a local judge. Is that bad? Nora asked. It means we need to be cleaner than clean, Sandra said. Every document, every timestamp, every number. Nothing they can poke a hole in. We understood. The preliminary hearing lasted 40 minutes and decided exactly nothing. Continuances, procedural motions, both sides establishing their positions. Standard opening moves. But 2 things happened that mattered. First, Harmon stood up and argued that the security camera footage should be inadmissible, obtained without Rita's knowledge or consent, he said, a violation of her privacy. Sandra was ready for that. Your Honor, the cameras were installed by the property owner's son, in the property owner's home, at the property owner's explicit request. Rita Goodman was a guest in that home. She had no reasonable expectation of privacy beyond her own bedroom, in which no cameras were installed. The judge made no ruling that day, but he didn't look at Harmon when he moved on. Second thing, I saw Victor Pruitt sitting in the back row of the gallery, not as a party to the case, just sitting there, watching. He left before the hearing ended and didn't make eye contact with anyone. I texted Sandra from my seat. Pruitt is here. Her response came 30 seconds later. I see him. Good. Let him watch. The bar complaint against Pruitt was moving on a separate track. and Sandra had made sure the timing would hurt. An Ohio bar investigation into an estate attorney, especially one involving allegations of elder financial abuse and undue influence, is not a quiet process. Word travels. Other attorneys talk. By March, we heard through Sandra that 2 other families in the county had contacted the bar with similar complaints about Pruitt. Different cases, different clients. Same pattern. An elderly person, alone, sick, a relative nearby with something to gain. A house visit. Papers signed under circumstances that couldn't quite hold up to scrutiny. We weren't the first family Rita and Pruitt had done this to. We were just the first ones with cameras. The financial elder abuse claim was the one that changed Rita's posture completely. Up until that point, she had been confident, dismissive even, the way someone is when they believe their paperwork is solid and their attorney knows the right people. But financial elder abuse in Ohio carries real teeth. Civil liability, potential criminal referral, personal assets at risk. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the $43,200 and what a judge might decide to do about it. Harmon filed a motion to have the financial claim separated from the will contest. Sandra opposed it. The judge denied Harmon's motion. That was the first moment I felt something shift. Nora felt it too. She called me that evening, and for the first time since the funeral, she sounded less like someone holding herself together and more like someone who had started to believe we might actually win. He denied the motion, she said. I know. Daniel, if they can't separate the claims, Rita is looking at the will contest and the financial abuse in the same courtroom, in front of the same judge, at the same time. That's exactly what Sandra wanted. A pause. She's good. She's very good, I said. Rita made one more attempt before the main hearing. A settlement offer, passed through Harmon to Sandra in early April. Rita would relinquish her claim to the house in exchange for us dropping the financial abuse claim entirely. No admission of wrongdoing. No repayment of the $43,200. Just, everyone walks away. Sandra called to walk us through it. She didn't editorialize, just laid out the terms clearly and waited. Nora spoke first. She wants to keep the money. That's the essence of it, yes, Sandra said. The money she stole from our father while he was dying. Yes. Nora was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. No. I didn't even need to answer. Sandra already knew. She sent Harmon a 1-line response that afternoon. Declined. See you in court. The main hearing was scheduled for the first week of May. 3 months away when we declined the settlement. It felt like a long time. It wasn't. Because in those 3 months, Victor Pruitt's situation went from bad to significantly worse. And when Pruitt started to crack, everything Rita had built started cracking with him. It started with a phone call Sandra received on a Thursday morning in late March. Victor Pruitt's personal attorney had reached out. Pruitt wanted to talk. Not in court, not on the record, just a conversation. Sandra called me immediately. He's looking for a way out, she said. What does that mean for us? It means the bar investigation is hurting him more than we thought. 2 more families came forward last week. The bar doesn't move fast, but when they do, they move hard. Pruitt is looking at potential disbarment. That changes his math considerably. He'd have to testify against Rita, I said. That's exactly what it means. We agreed to the meeting. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in Sandra's office. Pruitt came alone, no briefcase this time, no suit. Just a man in his late 50s who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. He sat down across from Sandra, looked at his hands for a moment, and then said something I hadn't expected. I didn't know she was going to hide the original will. Sandra didn't react, just waited. Rita told me Michael wanted to change his will, that his children had abandoned him, that he'd discussed it with her for months. I should have verified that independently. I know that. But she was convincing, and he stopped. I made a serious error in judgment. Mr. Pruitt, Sandra said evenly. An error in judgment is forgetting to file a document on time. What you're describing is conducting a will signing with a terminally ill man on heavy pain medication in his private residence without independent verification of his wishes or mental capacity. Pruitt said nothing. What exactly are you offering? Sandra asked. He looked up. A full written statement. Everything Rita told me, everything I observed during the signing, my honest assessment of Michael Sawyer's condition that afternoon. And his condition? A long pause. He asked me twice what we were there for. In the same conversation. The room was very quiet. Pruitt's written statement landed 14 pages. Sandra walked us through the key points that evening over the phone. Dad had asked twice what they were there for. Rita had answered both times before he could think. At one point during the signing, Dad had started talking about a fishing trip he'd taken in 1987, completely unprompted, and Rita had gently steered him back to the documents. Pruitt had told himself it was just an old man being an old man. He'd told himself a lot of things that afternoon. The statement also confirmed something we'd suspected but couldn't prove from the footage alone. Rita had contacted Pruitt 6 weeks before the visit with a specific request. She didn't want a consultation. She didn't want advice. She came to him with the new will already drafted, already worded, and asked him to make it official. All he had to do was show up and witness the signature. He'd charged her $800 for the house call. Nora was quiet for a long time after Sandra finished. Then she said, "Dad asked twice what they were there for." "Yes," Sandra said. And she answered for him. "Both times." That's what Pruitt states. I heard Nora exhale slowly. Not anger, something heavier than anger. The specific grief of learning that the thing you feared was even worse than you imagined. Is it enough? I asked Sandra. Combined with the footage, the medical records, and the financial documentation? A pause. Yes, I think it's enough. Rita found out about Pruitt's statement the way people like Rita find out about things, through someone who shouldn't have said anything but did. By early April, her entire posture had shifted. The dismissiveness was gone. The easy confidence, the hostess smile, the sense that she had already won and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up, all of it gone. Harmon started filing procedural delays, small motions designed to push the hearing date back by more time. Sandra blocked everyone. Rita called Nora directly in mid-April. Nora almost didn't pick up. I made mistakes, Rita said. The first time she'd admitted anything close to that. Your father and I had an understanding that maybe wasn't communicated properly. I think there's still a way to resolve this without dragging the family through a public hearing. Nora listened to the whole thing. Then she said, Rita, you stood at my father's funeral and called us city rats in front of 40 people, while his body was in the next room. Silence. We'll see you in court, Nora said, and hung up. She called me right after. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm ready. I know, I said. So was I? The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Millhaven didn't have much, a gas station, a diner, a courthouse that smelled like old carpet and central heating. Judge Patricia Howe, 60s, had presided over probate cases in that county for 16 years. Sandra had done her homework. Howe had zero tolerance for procedural games and a documented history of ruling hard against financial elder abuse. Harmon had pushed for a different judge. He didn't get one. Rita arrived with Harmon and 2 people I didn't recognize. Character witnesses, Sandra told us quietly as we took our seats. Neighbors, probably. People who'd seen Rita bring Dad groceries and assumed that told the whole story. Rita looked composed. Hair done, dark blazer, the same careful presentation she'd had at the funeral. She glanced at me and Nora once when she sat down. Not hostile. Almost, measuring. I looked straight ahead. Harmon opened by painting a picture that was almost impressive in its simplicity. Rita Goodman had sacrificed 3 years of her life for her dying brother. She had been there every single day when his children were 4 hours away building their careers. Michael Sawyer had expressed his wishes clearly, and a legally executed document reflected those wishes. The original will was old, predated his illness, and did not account for the reality of who had actually shown up. He was good. I'll give him that. Then Sandra stood up. She didn't raise her voice once in the entire opening. She just laid it out, methodically, quietly, in the exact order that made it hardest to dismiss. The $43,200. The timestamps. The 2 a.m. footage. Victor Pruitt's written statement. Dad asking twice what they were there for while Rita answered for him. The original will hidden behind a water heater 11 days after the funeral. The bar complaints from 2 other families. Not a family dispute, she told Judge Howe. A pattern. The footage was admitted. Harmon had fought hard to keep it out, but the ruling came down clearly. Cameras installed by the property owner's son at the property owner's request, no recording in private spaces. Admissible in full. They dimmed the lights and played 3 clips. The first was Rita at the cash jar. 2 a.m. Kitchen. The practiced ease of someone completely comfortable doing something they'd done dozens of times before. No hesitation. No glancing around. Just counting bills in the dark and going back to bed. The second was Pruitt arriving. The timestamp on screen. Rita at the door, dressed and waiting. The body language of 2 people who had arranged something in advance. The third was the cellar. Rita carrying the strongbox down the stairs 11 days after the funeral, pushing it behind the water heater, pausing to make sure it was fully out of sight. The courtroom was completely silent through all 3 clips. I watched Judge Howe's face during the cellar footage. She watched the screen without expression, but she wrote something down. Pruitt testified in the afternoon. He looked smaller on the stand than he had in Sandra's office. He confirmed everything in his written statement. The pre-drafted will Rita had brought to him, Dad's confusion during the signing, the 2 moments he'd asked what they were there for. He spoke carefully, like a man who understood that every word was costing him something. Harmon cross-examined hard, tried to establish that Dad had been lucid, that he'd signed willingly, that Pruitt had followed standard procedure. Pruitt didn't break, but he didn't help Rita either. When Harmon finished, Sandra asked one question on redirect. Mr. Pruitt, in your 20 years of practice, how many times have you conducted a will signing at a client's private residence? Pruitt looked at his hands. Twice. And the other time? The client was bedridden and had been assessed by 2 independent physicians as mentally competent. Was Michael Sawyer assessed by any independent physician before this signing? No, Pruitt said quietly. No further questions. Rita took the stand late in the afternoon. She was good, composed, measured, exactly the right amount of emotion when she talked about Dad, the doctor visits, the grocery runs, the nights she'd sat with him when he couldn't sleep. Some of it was probably even true. That's what made her dangerous. She wasn't inventing a relationship from nothing. She was taking something real and using it as cover for everything else. Harmon walked her through the will, the house, her understanding of Dad's wishes. She spoke about it like it was sacred, like honoring a dying man's final request. Then Sandra stood up. She placed a single document on the podium. Didn't hold it up, didn't wave it around. Just set it down and looked at Rita. Mrs. Goodman, you testified that my client's father expressed his wishes to you clearly and repeatedly over a period of months. That's correct. And yet you felt it necessary to have those wishes documented by an attorney who came to the house rather than having Mr. Sawyer visit an office or request his own attorney of record. He wasn't well enough to travel. His medical records show 3 separate outpatient appointments in the 6 weeks before Mr. Pruitt's visit. He was well enough to travel to those. Rita's jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. Sandra picked up the document. I'd like to direct your attention to the bank withdrawal records from Michael Sawyer's account. Between March of 2021 and May of 2023, $43,200 withdrawn in cash increments. Can you tell the court what those withdrawals were for? Household expenses. His care. Every withdrawal was under $350. He preferred smaller amounts. At 2 a.m. Silence. Rita looked at Harmon. Harmon looked at the table. I'm sorry, Rita said. Several of these withdrawals correspond to timestamps from security footage showing you accessing Mr. Sawyer's cash reserves in the kitchen at 2 a.m. Would you like to revise your answer? The courtroom was very quiet. Rita didn't answer. Her composure was still there, barely, at the edges, like paint on a wall that's starting to bubble. Sandra set the document down. No further questions. Judge Howe didn't rule from the bench that day. She said she'd have a written decision within 3 weeks. We walked out into the parking lot in the late afternoon. Cold, gray Ohio sky, the kind of flat light that makes everything look like it's waiting for something. Nora didn't say anything for a while. Then she looked at me. We did everything we could, she said. We did, I said. Now we wait. We waited. The 3 weeks felt like 3 months. Nora threw herself into work. I ran 6 miles every morning just to have somewhere to put the energy. We talked every few days. Not about the case, just talked. The way we hadn't in years. About Dad, mostly. Stories from when we were kids. The way he'd burned every batch of pancakes he ever made, but kept trying anyway. The fishing trips. The way he'd shown up to every single one of my school things without ever making a big deal of it. Grief has a way of finding the cracks in a waiting period. Sandra called on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks and 1 day after the hearing. Judge Howe issued her ruling. I sat down. And the second will has been ruled invalid. Undue influence. Insufficient evidence of testamentary capacity at the time of signing. The original will stands. I didn't say anything for a moment. Daniel, Sanders said, you and Nora own the house. The financial elder abuse claim was ruled in our favor as well. Rita was ordered to repay the full $43,200 plus interest, just over $47,000 total. The judge also referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges. Sandra had warned us that referral didn't guarantee prosecution. But it wasn't nothing. It was a judge looking at everything Rita had done and deciding it deserved a harder look. Victor Pruitt surrendered his notary license 2 days before the ruling came down. The bar investigation was still ongoing. His 22-year career in that county was effectively over. I called Nora the moment I hung up with Sandra. She picked up on the first ring. I could tell from her breathing she was already crying, or had been, just before. I didn't give a speech. I just said, "We got it." She didn't say anything for a while. Then, Dad would have hated all of this. "I know," I said. "He would have wanted us to just let it go. Keep the peace." Probably. But he also would have hated what she did to him. A pause. More than he hated conflict. "Yeah," I said. He would have. Rita didn't call. Didn't reach out through Harmon. Didn't send a message through any of the relatives who'd nodded along at the funeral. Just silence. The particular silence of someone who has run out of moves. The $47,000 repayment was structured through a court order. Rita's Columbus apartment was leveraged. It would take her 2 years to pay it back in full. The house in Millhaven went back to us, legally, officially, on paper, the way it always should have been. Nora and I drove out there together on a Saturday in early June. First time back since the court inspection. We walked through every room without saying much. The smell of the place was the same. Old wood, coffee, something that just smelled like Dad. The hardwood floor in the hallway still creaked in exactly the same spot. We sat on the back porch for a long time. 2 acres of Ohio land going green in the early summer. The tree line our father had looked at every morning for 30 years. Nora had a cup of coffee. I had one too. We didn't talk about Rita, or Pruitt, or the case, or any of it. We just sat there. That felt like enough.